In embroidery, the two stitches that we'll use the most often are the fill stitch and the satin stitch. Now the fill stitch does exactly what the name implies. It's used for filling in large areas of your design. And we learned how to create fill stitches in part 1 of this video series in Inkscape. Now you can use the fill stitch for your design exclusively. You don't have to use anything else. But if you really want to take your designs up a level and make them look more professional, you also want to learn how to incorporate the satin stitch. Now a satin stitch is used for outlines or narrow shapes, as well as a lot of times for text. And it just gives it a cleaner edge, it makes the text more legible, and it just makes everything look more professional. It has a kind of a satiny look to it, which is where the name comes from. Now, the satin stitch is also a little bit more efficient sometimes because it often requires fewer stitches. So learning when to use a fill stitch and when to use a satin stitch is an important part of learning to digitize for embroidery. So let's learn how to do the satin stitch. So first I want to import a new document here that I can use. So let's open up, we're going to use this word art here. And then make sure we like those options and click on OK. Now I'm going to make sure it fits on my document here. Now actually I'm going to outline these in using the satin stitch. I'm going to make this a fairly large project. So I'm going to go up here and change the document properties, and we're going to make this for a large sweatshirt, for example. So I'm going to change this and make it that hoop size of 11.9. And this one I'm going to make 7.9. And then we can close that. All right, and so now I have a much larger hoop to work with, so I'm going to enlarge my project to fit inside of that hoop. Now I'm ready to trace the bitmap, so I'm going to click on that green button for Trace Bitmap. I'm going to use the multicolor option and choose colors, and I have two colors, the white background and the black text. I'm going to choose the option here to remove the background because I don't want that white part. And then I'll leave the speckles, the corners optimized the same, and click here on Apply. Now I'm going to go over to my layers and objects, and I'm going to hide the image so that I only see my path here. Now this is going to be the fill, and I'm actually going to change the color of it. I'm going to make it red, so I'm just going to come down here and click on that red button. Now I also want to change the name here, and this time I'm going to call the name Fill so that I know that's the fill part of this object. Now to make an outline around it, I'm going to right click on Fill and choose the option to duplicate and make a second one. Now I'm going to change the name of the one up top and call that the outline. So in stitching, the one here on the bottom is what's going to be done first. So you want to make sure you have the fill on the bottom and then the outline on top of that. Now to change this from this outline, right now it's called outline, but it's actually still fill, I need to go up here where I have my option here for fill and stroke. And if you happen not to see that, if you click here on object, you can find fill and stroke right there. And now if I click on fill and stroke, I'm going to see my options here. Fill right now is turned on right here. I'm going to click on the X to turn that fill off. And then I'm going to click here on stroke paint, and I'm going to choose the option there. Now here I can choose my color. So you can pick something here, you can use the colors down here. If you're using the colors down here, be sure and hold down the Shift key when you select your color. So if I were going to change it to green, I would hold down the Shift key and click on it. I want it to be black. Now you can click on stroke style and change how wide that stroke is going to be. So right now it's at 1. I'm going to change it to 3. Now you could change it to something different, but it is important when you're choosing your satin stitch that you don't make a satin stitch less than 1.2 millimeters wide, because it would go up and down so much in the same spot that needle would go up and down so much in the same spot that you would likely catch your fabric. The needle might break, so there's just, it doesn't work well if it gets too narrow. And then you also have to watch about not making it too wide. So a general rule of thumb is not making it more than 7 millimeters wide, because if you have it too wide, it's difficult to get the tension right and it's likely to loop. So you want to make sure when you're doing satin stitching that you try to keep it between 1.2 and 7 millimeters. And that, for example, is why doing this large project, I'm probably not going to want to satin stitch these big letters because it would get fairly large. It might loop. And so I've got the stroke style set to 3. And now if I go back to my layers and objects, I can see I have the fill, which I could turn on or off, and the outline. Now, the outline right now is a stroke, but it's still not a satin stitch. So with that outline selected, I want to go up here to Extensions, choose Ink Stitch, choose Tools, Satin, and choose Stroke to Satin. So I'm going to change that stroke that I created into a satin stitch. Okay, and now if I zoom in here, let's make this window a little smaller and zoom in. You can see what I have are these little rails around it with little hashtags, I guess, that go across them to show what direction that satin stitch should go. So you can see all those rails. Okay, and those rails, anytime you see those in a project, that indicates that is a satin stitch. So now I'm going to actually see what that would look like stitched out. So I'll click on Extensions and Ink Stitch and Params. And you can see right now it's doing that red fill stitch, and now it's going to go back over it with that black satin stitch. Now with satin stitching, you may also want to use an underlay. That just makes it a little bit thicker, less likely to have any white showing through. So I'm going to choose here the zigzag underlay, check mark that. It's going to stitch it out again so you can see what difference that makes. It's just going to make it a little bit thicker and less likely to have any of the background show through. Now one thing you did notice as it was stitching it, it stitched it in a very strange order. Started with the I, and then the O, then the N, then the U, the N. That's going to cause a lot of jumping back and forth, so I want to try to fix that. So here I'm going to click on Apply and Quit. Now I'm going to look at these layers, and now I'm going to actually be able to see each of the paths. Now remember, whatever it does first, whatever here is at the bottom is what it's going to do first. So the fill is going to do first, which is what I want. Okay, now it has the I next, which is not what I want. So I'm going to look for that U. I'm just going to have it go left to right. Okay, so I'm going to move the U down. And then I'm going to find that N, the second N, and move that down. There's the I, there's the O, and there's the final N. Okay, so now if I go back to Extensions, Ink Stitch, first make sure I have nothing selected, or make sure I just have the layer selected. Okay, now I'm going to go to Extensions, Ink Stitch, Params, and I'm going to watch it stitch that out. So there's the fill stitch, and now it's going to go in a normal order. Okay, again, check, make sure I've got that zigzag underlay on, and then click on Apply and Quit. Now I'm ready to export this project to be able to print that out. So I'll click here on Export, and then change it to a PDS file. I'm going to change the name to be Wordmark with outline, and click on Export. Okay, and that is how you could do an outline. You can do it around text. You could also do this around an image file. So what do you want to do if you want your letters to actually be the satin stroke and not just have an outline around it? So that's what we'll look at now. So if you take a logo, I'm going to take my logo back here, put that back on my file. Notice I did go back to the smaller document size, the 4x4 for this one. And now I'm going to go into the layers and objects. I'll see I have the image file. I'm going to click on that little box next to the eyeball for opacity, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity so that it's kind of lightly grayed out there, because I'm going to basically go in here and draw over those lines. So now I'm going to select the pen tool here, zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to click to start, and I'm going to draw tool right there, and then I'm going to click enter to make it draw that line. So you can see that's fairly close, but I do want to go in here and show you how to make adjustments. So I've got fill and stroke. I'm going to click on that. On fill, I want to make sure I have that turned off. So click on fill and then click on that X button. Then I'm going to turn on the stroke, make sure that that's turned on. Stroke style, this is where I can adjust the thickness of that line. So I want to get it as close as I can. We'll go back in a minute and make some adjustments here, but just get it as close as you can so that it's the width of that line. So I've got it at 2.3. Again, watch out, make sure it's not too small. You don't want to go below 1.2, and make sure it's not too wide. You don't want to go above 7. Once you have that adjusted, you can continue drawing the lines. As you draw the lines, you do want to think about the order you draw those lines is the order in which it's going to stitch. So you can rearrange them later, but it's easier if you go ahead and have an idea of what you want it to stitch first. So I'm going to go ahead and finish drawing the U here. And I'm just going to kind of draw in the center of that U. Anytime I get to a point I want it to stop, I'm going to click on the enter button. And then I'll draw that across. On the N, I'm going to draw this part first. And then I'm going to go draw this part. And then I'm going to draw this part across. Again, we're going to make adjustments later, so don't try to get this perfect. Just do it kind of quickly to follow the outline. And for the eye, I'm going to do that middle part first. And then I'll do the top. I could have done the bottom first, and then the bottom. And on the O, I'm just going to start somewhere in the middle there. Trace that around. Meet that back up. And for the N, I'll do the same way I did that first N. And then go across. Okay, and now I have the strokes that I need. So remember, for a satin stitch, I want to start with a stroke most of the time. So I've got the strokes now. So now I just need to turn those into satin. So if I click on layers and objects, I can see all of the paths, all of the lines that I just drew. So I'm going to select all of them, go to extensions, ink stitch, find tools, satin, and click here on stroke to satin. And it's going to change all of those to the satin. And again, you'll recognize that it is a satin stitch because it has these rungs and rails across it. You can see that they're not perfect, so I'm going to go in there and adjust them. So I'll zoom in fairly close. I'm going to click on the node tool here. And then when I click on these objects, these little boxes will appear, and then I'll be able to drag those to where I want them and make sure that they are much closer to the outline. On the rungs, you want to make sure you can change the direction a little if you want, but you want to make sure it goes completely across that line. So it has to cross the tracks. If it doesn't, your project is not going to work out very well, and you'll see that when you go to params. So again, just continuing to make all of these in the right spot, making sure that everything goes across, and going all the way around the U here. And now once I have everything done, I can select everything that makes up the U. And now go to extensions, ink stitch, params. It'll recognize this is a satin stitch and will actually make it a satin stitch. I can add a zigzag underlay to give it a little more depth. And now I can hit apply and quit. So now I have the U done that way. I'm going to continue and do the same thing to all of my letters. So on this end, I'm just going to drag all of those out. Make sure the rung goes completely across. And if you do your params and you see that it doesn't look right, it means that one of your rungs is not going all the way across. That's almost always the problem that you're going to have. Okay, and now let's see what happens on this end. So I'm going to select everything that makes up the end and go to Extensions, Ink Stitch, Params. Okay, it's going to begin stitching it, and you're going to see, oh, something's way off here. So that means that's what it's going to look like when you have a rung that's not completely connected. So I'm going to hit Cancel. Now I'm going to go back in and look at my rungs and see which one do I have that's not completely crossed. Okay, so this one looks like it could be a problem. This one here looks like it could be a problem. Okay, and let's see if those two adjustments made it fixed. So again, select everything that makes up the end, go to Extensions, Ink Stitch, Params, and let's watch it stitch out this time. Okay, so you can see now it has fixed itself. I'm going to turn that zigzag underlay on again, and now I will click on Apply and Quit. Okay, now I'm going to continue on and do the eye. And now I'll do the same thing with the O and with the N. And now I have all of that done. I want to look at the params one more time to make sure everything looks good. So I'm going to go here to Extensions and Ink Stitch and Params. Now I can see the whole thing stitched out. Make sure I didn't forget to put the underlay anywhere. Make sure there's nothing crossing over. And once that looks good, I can hit Apply and Quit. Now I'm ready to export it. So I'm going to click on the Export button right there. I want to make sure that I put it in PES format. Give it a name that I'll recognize. Wordmark Satin will work. And then click on Export. And so finally, let's look at a more complex example where you need a combination of fill stitches and satin stitches at different places. So for example, I was given this picture and said to recreate this. And so as you can see, there's some satin stitching around, but it's not just on the border on the outside, but there's satin stitches at different places all around, and there's different color satin stitches. So let's look at how you would go about recreating something like this. So I already have the file here. I've already got it as a fill file with the different 5 colors broken down. And now I'm ready to figure out where I want to put my satin stitches. Now, if I were to just take this black path and turn it into an outline, so into a stroke, you can see I would have satin stitches going all over the place as it tried to outline these features. So that's not what I want. Unfortunately, I can't use that. So instead, I'm going to go in and actually draw the strokes that I want to be there. So wherever I want a satin stitch, I'm going to draw it. I'm actually going to turn all of these off. So all of my paths, I'm turned off. The image file, I'm going to turn on. And then I'm going to turn the opacity down so that I can use that for tracing out those lines that I want to have wherever I want to have the satin stitch. So I'm going to use the pen tool over here. I'm going to turn the fill on that pen off, and I'm going to turn the stroke on. And now I've pulled up my picture so that I can see what it is I need to trace. The first thing I'm going to trace is this outer line here. So I'm going to just start right here at the bottom and just trace around that big outer line, just clicking as I go. And again, just like we did with the letters before, we will adjust this later. So this just needs to be approximate. And then we'll also, this one has a lot of curves to it, so we'll do some curvature. Okay, and that's the end. So I'm going to click on Enter, and that's going to turn that into a line. Now mine happens to be pretty accurate for where I want it to be, but you might want to adjust the stroke style. So if you need to increase that a little bit. Or if you want to change the color, you can do that as well. I'll leave mine the way it is with the black. That's black. Okay, and now I'm just going to continue doing that for my other lines. So everywhere on here where I want to have a stroke. Now, some of these lines are much too thick, so I'm going to actually go ahead and make them a little bit skinnier. I can do that later with the nodes tool, but it'll be easier if I'm at least close here. So I'm going to select some of the ones that are way too skinny or way too fat, and then go ahead and reduce those a little bit so that I can tell a little more accurately what they are. Okay, and now I do have some other strokes that I want to be in different colors. So I have this gray one here, this white one, that gray, and that gray there. So I'm going to add those as well. So let's change our stroke color. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, select this gray color. Use my pen tool again. Okay, and now it looks like I have all the strokes here that are here in the picture, unless I missed anything. And so now I'm going to convert those lines to satin. So let me open this back up over here so I can see everything again. Okay, and now we're going to go to our layers, make sure we get all the layers selected that we want to be satin, and go extensions, ink stitch, satin, and I'll go stroke to satin. Okay, and you can see it converted all of those into the rails and rungs that I need to make the satin stitches. So now I just want to make sure that I get those more closely aligned there and smooth them out. So I'm going to select one of the paths I created, this one here, that's the big one, the first one I made. Make sure that I'm in the node tool, so select that node tool. And now I want to select all, so I'm going to hit the Command A or Control A button so that they all turn blue. And then I'm going to use this auto smooth feature here. It looks like a curve with a pink dot on it to make it all turn more into curves and not so much those right angles or sharp angles that I had. Now I'm going to zoom in and just move those points more closely so that they more closely align here with my outline here. So make sure now that I have these little curves, I can move them around and adjust the curving, and then the dot or the square in the middle will allow me to actually move the positioning. Okay, again, make sure all your rungs actually cross. Okay, we'll just go around this way. If you're ever creating something and you're like, this doesn't go all the way, I can just double click there to make a new node. And then I'm just going to go all the way around, making sure this works. Okay, and once I have that line done, I want to select one of the different paths. We'll do this little one here and just do the same thing. Again, I've selected the path, then I can hit Control or Command A and use the smooth tool that will allow me to make these curves. And then I'm just going to adjust all of them so that they actually line up a little more closely with that figure there. And again, make sure all of the rungs cross completely. And I'm going to do the same thing with all of the lines that I've created. So again, select, Control A, curve it, okay, and then adjust. And once I've made it all the way around, I want to do a double check, make sure all these rungs are crossing where they should be. And now I'm going to turn my fill layers back on. So here I had those fill layers, so I'm going to turn those all back on, make them visible. I'm going to turn the image off. And now I'm ready to see what this was going to look like stitched out. So I'll click here on extensions and then ink stitch and then params. Wait for that to load. I'm going to see it do the fill stitches first and then do those satin stitches. Now if everything looks good like this one does, that's great, but a lot of times it's not, so don't panic. That just most likely means that one of those rungs does not cross both rails. So you'll need to go back into your file, check all the way around, look for anywhere where those aren't crisscrossing the way they should be. Another problem that can sometimes develop is if, especially in an area like this one that's thick, if those rails cross one another, that can also lead to a problem. So if there's anything you don't like, remember you just hit cancel here, go back in there and adjust it. If you like everything, you can turn on your underlay if you haven't already, and then hit apply and quit. Now I'm ready to export this file, so I can click here on the export button and make sure I have it in PES format. Give it a good name and then click on export. And so now you know how to use the satin stitch. Just to recap, we used it to create an outline around an object using that stroke function. We also used it to trace over a design, an image, to make the whole thing a satin stitch. And then we also used the satin stitch on top of a fill stitch in order to create some layers and complexity there. And so those are several different ways to use a satin stitch. Now there are other ways in Inkscape to create satin stitches, but I tend to prefer the one where you're creating a stroke and then convert that stroke to satin. So now you know how to use the fill stitch and how to make your designs even more professional by using the satin stitch.